Hey everyone, welcome to this small discussion about Dragon's Dogma. So it's kind of a weird thing because people have been wanting me to play this game for a while. I've been almost harassed by many people to try this one out. And so I finally did try Dragon Dogma, and today I want to take the time to have a discussion about this game. And with me, I have Sheenshots, who obviously has quite a bit of videos about this game. So there you go.
I do indeed.
So I have a few things we want to talk about. And the first one is probably, I'm going to ask you a simple question. How did you get your hands on Dragon's Dogma?
Well, I used to play Outward basically every day when I was playing Outward constantly. A lot of people suggested that I play Dragon's Dogma because it has a very, at least, similar RPG focus to it. And so I just randomly decided to stream it one day, and then I went all the way through the game. And when I got to the end of the game, is actually when I fell in love with it. And then I just started making a ton of videos on like cool skills and all kind of random stuff you can do in it. And that's when I really fell in love with it because then I was doing all this fun stuff, killing monsters in weird ways and just exploring everything. And yeah, that's really when I just started playing it over and over till they released the D2 announcement, and I was like, heck yeah, bro.
Yeah, that's probably the reason why we're talking about Dragon's Dogma today. It's because obviously it's a very old game because the first version came out in 2012 and they just announced like something like 2 or 3 weeks ago. They released some
Yeah.
gameplay footage of Dragon's Dogma 2, which is something people were talking about for quite a while, but a lot of them were like kind of on copium hoping it would come out, but it didn't.
Yeah.
And yeah. What can you say about this, about Dragon's Dogma 2? Maybe we can start by talking a bit about Dragon's Dogma 2. Or maybe, no, maybe we
Um,
should talk a bit more about the first one. And so,
that's a good idea. Yeah.
yeah, what did you think about Dragon's Dogma in general? And maybe I can talk a bit about it too. You can go and start by.
Yeah, I would say Dragon's Dogma 2 is very exciting because Dragon's Dogma has so much potential. I think that's why a lot of people like it so much is that it doesn't really feel 100% there because you're missing a lot of like the open world is a little bit too basic at times, just a little bit too empty. You've got a couple aspects that aren't really as awesome. Like some of the quests aren't really nearly as cool as Skyrim for sure. But the combat, man, the combat is 10 out of 10 by far. And I think if they're going to improve that in any way, it's going to be S tier game for sure. Just because, I mean, I'll play through. I think a lot of people end up, a lot of people that I've seen are like, oh, I don't really like this game, quit in about the first hour or two. That's when, yeah, I think my brother picked it up and that's when he quit, was first hour or two. First time I played it as well. And then the second time I played it, because I got past that first couple of hours, I got into the real meat of the game and the combat. That's when you really like it. So I'm hoping that the new one at least hooks people a little bit faster with the game. The graphics is going to obviously be better, which is going to be nice. But yeah, honestly, it's just the combat. That combat is so S tier. You could do all kinds of things with the skills and just fighting an ogre with a sword jabbing into his face. I mean, who doesn't like that? It's awesome.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, we obviously, you talked about kind of the elephant in the room, and that is the comparison with Skyrim, because the original Dragon's Dogma, not Dark Arisen, the original Dragon's Dogma came out something like 3 or 4 months after Skyrim. And obviously, Skyrim was the enormous success that we know, that we still talk about today. And maybe it's kind of outshined Dragon's Dogma for quite a lot of reasons. And so the first, I've made this comparison when I started playing Dragon's Dogma not so long ago, because I was a very big Skyrim player. And there's a lot of things to say about the way Dragon's Dogma kind of showed with time that it had some qualities that kind of were maybe a bit too early for when the time it came out. And these qualities that Dragon Dogma has are things that people started liking maybe 5 years ago, and maybe with the success of the Souls games a bit. I don't know, what do you think about this?
I mean, I know the comparison between Skyrim and Dragon's Dogma is very similar. It's very interesting that they came out in a very similar time frame. I actually didn't know that for the longest time when I was first playing it. A lot of people brought that up. I think both is actually a cool comparison because you can actually get your companion in Skyrim. You get one companion pretty much. You get someone who can follow you around and help you with stuff, and then you get your three in Dragon's Dogma. You get the one that's your main pawn. You can hire two pawns. And so there is some comparison there, which is kind of neat. I think Dragon's Dogma's pawn system is both why it was so successful and why it wasn't so successful in the same way, because the pawn system is very confusing. And I mean, the AI is not brilliant. Let's just say that. Everybody knows the AI isn't that brilliant. And so maybe at sometimes it's just a little annoying that you can't get your pawns to do exactly what you want. And I don't know. I found the charm in it though. It's kind of fun. It's kind of fun to get your pawns to be goofy and just mess around with them and stuff. But I do understand why people don't like them as much because the AI definitely, if they improve it in 2 to be a lot better, it's going to be quite a big shift. At least that part alone. I think that was one of the things they mentioned in the trailer was they wanted to make the AI a lot better because, I mean, man, sometimes your AI is really stupid.
Yeah,
it's fun, but sometimes it's really bad.
I have this quick moment that I always have in my head is that so my main pawn is a healer, and so I always, all the time, end up just picking my pawn up on my shoulder and bringing it out of danger because else it's just casting in the middle of enemies and gets constantly cancelled.
Yeah.
But at the same time,
medic.
Yeah, but at the same time,
the healer is a very specific one that I like.
Yeah.
If you don't have, the healer is very funny. So the healer has the healing, which is how you want to use it most of the time. And then they also have, I think it was high miasma, I think is what it, or I don't remember the exact one it is. It's like this weird tether you can have them tether enemies. So half the time I'll be like, okay, I want them to tether the monster, and then they'll go and they'll heal 2 feet from the monster instead of tethering. It's like, come on.
Yeah, and it's but if we compare it to Skyrim, like saying that Dragon's Dogma AI is not bright, when you look at Skyrim's companion AI, it's kind of like, comparing something like a retarded child with a monkey.
Yeah,
I don't know.
It's not great either. It's not great either.
Skyrim's AI is, because in Dragon's Dogma, for example, the best example I have in mind is how much pawns talk and say interesting things. Sometimes they keep saying always the same things, like wolf hunts in packs or a tusk is loose. They keep repeating the same things over and over. But if you look at what Skyrim NPCs followers can say, it's very, very limited. It's just, oh, a cave. Yeah, cool. And so I think Dragon's Dogma, when I played Dragon's Dogma and compared it to Skyrim, so obviously I played Oblivion 2, which came before Skyrim. And on a visual point of view, Dragon's Dogma is way closer to Oblivion than it is to Skyrim in many ways. You have this map that is not very diverse. It's mostly forests and plains. And then Oblivion had the same thing with maps with a little bit of mountains and mostly forests, lush forests. And then when it comes to on a graphical point of view, Dragon's Dogma is a bit, it looks way more like Oblivion than it does to Skyrim. Skyrim has a map where there's grass everywhere, trees everywhere. Whenever you look at vanilla Skyrim, it looks way better than Dragon's Dogma does. But at the same time, well, Dragon's Dogma has cloth physics and Skyrim doesn't. Like if you look at clothes in Skyrim, they don't move. They don't have physics. Well, Dragon's Dogma does have physics. So there's...
I never noticed that.
Yeah, there's these small comparisons. For example, in Skyrim, you can pick up pretty much any objects. And in Dragon's Dogma, you can pick up specific objects, but the interaction in Dragon's Dogma feels way more natural than just Skyrim making every object levitate with your mind. You see what I mean? Is that on one side, Skyrim had a lot of very good things that maybe were more accessible than Dragon Dogma has. But at the same time, right now, if we look at games that come out, they are way closer to Dragon's Dogma than they are to Skyrim. And so I think Dragon's Dogma was maybe a bit too ahead of its time in many regards.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I 100% agree. I think a lot of the aspect, especially with all of the mechanics. That's another thing I brought up a lot of the time when I was playing the game. Is the combat is what I think is the most S tier aspect of the game. But I would say the second best is probably just the many number of mechanics that they just added in. Like you can pick up your pawns, you can pick up guards, you can throw people, you can steal stuff with certain skills, you can rob people. Um, Expansion of the kind of a thief play style would be cool in the second one. But yeah, you could do all kinds of cool stuff like having your pawns change how they actually act in battle. You can use a bunch of different items different ways. Like there's some what do they call them? They're like the books that you can use spells with and stuff. Just throw them down. They cause like random. So like Magic Knight, I think, has a massive wide yellow spell that causes magic damage. You can actually just use it with one of the spell books, which is really neat. And so all this extra stuff just added in here, like especially with skills having different interactions with the enemies as well. Some of the ones that have parries and obviously the giant tornado. We don't like that one. That adds a really cool mechanic where you just throw enemies into the air and they land at different spots. It's very neat to be able to explore the entire, even though the world itself, is a little bit emptier than probably a lot of people would like. It makes it kind of fun to explore because there's always something interesting you could do with the world, like with the wind mechanic, where the wind pushes your character back, and depending on how small or big you are, and it's very unique. It's a very unique way to play through the game.
It's funny you mentioned that because, well, one of the specific aspects of Dragon's Dogma is that your character customization will directly influence gameplay, and that's something most people probably do not like at all. Like the fact that if you have a tall character, you're probably going to have more HP, run faster. But if you have a small character, you'll be able to get into small holes where a tall character will not be able to go. And it's something that I don't know how to feel about it, because on one way, I really love it. And on the other way, I can understand people wanting to have a character that is purely based on what they want it to look like. I don't know. What do you feel? How do you feel about that?
I actually really love that system, and why I like it is it makes the game, especially Dragon's Dogma, the first game, without knowing anything about the second one, it makes the game feel very, very much like a action game based around D&D. So I actually am not a big D&D fan. Like I like it a little bit. I play it here and there. It's fun. I enjoy it to an extent. I don't like Baldur's Gate 3. I tried it. I was not a fan. I don't like the combat system. And so it's kind of this mix, this in-between where you have D&D aspects. You're fighting D&D-based monsters. That's kind of what it's known for, is these massive, the Gorgons and stuff like that. These D&D-based monsters, but you have a action combat system. And so you're just thrown in the middle of it. And I think that really plays into the character creation. You can make your character act differently, and you can really play into the role-playing aspect. So if you want to play as a dwarf, which I've done this before, I played as a really small character. They move around super fast. They can climb really quickly, but they're really teeny. And so it's just very interesting to see versus a large character that's going to be really slow, really tough to climb with, but he's going to be super good at, say, maybe a two-handed weapon. Maybe two-handing an axe, two-handing or the long swords, what a lot of people like to do. And so I really like it for role-playing. I understand why people might not enjoy it as much, because it's like, it messes with the, if you make a character a certain way and then you don't end up liking it, that's going to mess with the rest of your run. You might want to just completely restart. But I really love the role-playing aspect that you can throw in there. It's a lot deeper than people think it is, I think.
Yeah, I've had a lot of fun. Obviously, I've only played with one character, and so I made a very tall and muscular one. But I play Mystic Knight, so it's not that much of a problem. But yeah,
that's interesting. You chose Mystic Knight more often though, because I remember I chose Mystic or Magic Archer, which is probably the two most magic-centered classes other than Sorcerer.
Yeah, the thing is, I'm not a very original person. I always play the Paladin type characters, and Mystic Knight's probably what comes closest to what I usually play.
Yeah, I agree.
And it's funny that we talked about the combat because, I'm going to take the time to shit quickly on Skyrim, because Skyrim's combat is awful. So when we compare Skyrim's combat
Yeah.
with Dragon's Dogma's combat, it's obvious. But I don't know. Have you played any Monster Hunter games?
I have not really. I
Yeah.
jumped in for like an hour or two. I didn't get too much into it though.
So maybe that's something I can talk about a bit more than you. But I'm not the biggest fan of Monster Hunter, but I've played Monster Hunter World quite a bit, and it's obvious that there's links between Dragon's Dogma and Monster Hunter. Like the mechanics, the way the character moves around, the way he climbs and interacts with the environment, the animations are very close to what Monster Hunter is. And even the bow animations look like the bow animations from Monster Hunter. And so I've made my research a bit, and obviously both are Capcom games. And so yeah, they probably did interact quite a bit. And it's funny to see that a game like Monster Hunter, which is in some ways an RPG, but far from the classic open world RPG like we think about it. Well, Monster Hunter's gameplay actually suits the RPG scene way better than we might have thought it would. Like the ability to climb monsters. It's not something you think about when you think about a classic RPG, but it fits so well. And in Dragon's Dogma, that's probably one of the coolest things there is.
Oh, for sure. And I think it really just makes the game at least more intriguing than some other games. Like, hey, in this game you can climb an ogre. Okay, that sounds pretty awesome. Oh, well, what about climbing in a hydra? That sounds even way cooler, you know? And climbing a different monster feels different every time. Like climbing a griffin, that's one of the coolest experiences, man. This giant flying winged creature lands and then you just climb up to its face and start hacking it with a dagger. Some of those moments, man. That's why I wish that they had more of those types of quests, because the quests of Dragon's Dogma are not some of my favorites, but a couple of them where they have this giant monster at the end. Like there's this one where they send you to fight a cockatrice, and then you end up having this massive battle with a cockatrice in the middle of town, and you're just this weird creature that can petrify you. And it's just those moments like that. I wish there were more of those in the game, because those are the best. It's so much fun to climb them and have your pawns climb them and just try and take on these monsters in different ways.
Yeah, well, if we talk about Dragon's Dogma's quest, I have to admit that most of Dragon's Dogma's story is, well, not the most interesting. It's definitely, I think, one of the weakest points of the game. I've had my fun with it, especially if you follow, the way the romance system works in Dragon's Dogma is very funny, a very funny thing to play around, where you have these random people that shows up at the end that you have no idea why. But on my first run, I romanced, the Duke's wife. And so there's this quest where you're literally, well, taking away the Duke's wife and saving her from the dungeon. And it was quite interesting, though it felt a bit forced in some ways. But yeah, the quest,
that mission for sure. I agree with you on that. Yeah,
like the way it's funny because when you carry most of your when you try and grab an enemy or a pawn and you carry it, it's always this animation where you carry it on the shoulder and it's kind of fighting to escape you. And then when you catch the Duke's wife, you carry her like a princess or everything. So I've not tried this out, but I felt really, really tempted to just throw her out the window to see what it does. I've not done it, but I really feel like I'll probably do it at some point. But there's all these funny interactions, like with grabbing. I at first I was not sure what I could grab and what I could not. And so one thing that was very funny and surprising to me is that, when there are these flying enemies, some of them you can, put them down, then grab them, and throw them off a cliff and they'll die, even if they're very, very resistant.
And one of the really cool things about flying enemies, I've never seen this. I've heard you can do it, but I've never been able to do it myself. Apparently, if you get grabbed by a flying enemy and your pawn is below you and they drop you, because they'll try to drop you from heights, your pawn can actually catch you and save your fall, which is really neat. But I don't think I've ever seen it, because that has just never come up. And so, again, that's another mechanic that, you don't know about it, but if it randomly happens to you, it's super awesome.
Well, what I've seen, and I was surprised by it, is that I grabbed one of my pawns, and then I threw it at another pawn, and the other pawn grabbed the guy.
Yeah.
So there's
Yeah.
these tiny interactions. Like, one of the funniest things I like to do is, for example, you can grab rats. And the way you grab the rats, you grab him by the neck, and it feels like you punished a fucking cat or something. And then you can throw him off cliffs, like, for no reason. It's just like, when you think about it, like, someone had to work on that. Someone had to create an animation for a grabbed rat that is going to, at some point fight to escape you. And who does that? So there's all these small details that someone had to think about that kind of blows your mind when you stumble on them.
Yeah, I like grabbing the spiders. That's one of my favorites. They look ridiculous.
Yeah, I agree. And so that's a lot of things I love about this game, and I was really surprised by many things. But maybe I can come back on something that you talked about, maybe about your brother dropping the game pretty fast, is that Dragon's Dogma difficulty curve is weird. Like, not as weird as in the Elder Scrolls Online games, where you have these difficulty curves that literally make no sense. But in Dragon's Dogma, the early game is hard when you start your character for the first time.
Very much so.
And then at some point, especially when you finish your first game, you're going to go into New Game Plus, then everything is completely easy. You destroy whatever you roll on. And then you get you get to Bitterback Island, and then everything rolls on you.
And then you get destroyed. Exactly.
You get destroyed again, and then you end up finishing the first run of Bitterback Island, and then you get to the second run, and everything rolls on you again, and you get to the final boss of Bitterback Island 2, like, the second version of Diamond.
Mm-hmm.
And then he fucks you up, and you do absolutely no damage to him. To be honest, I doubt a lot of players had the patience to kill the second version of a boss.
Yeah, especially since it takes quite a long time to get there, and most of the time you want to be level 200 when you're trying to do it, or at least a level 160, with a decent weapon. Well, yeah, I think a lot of people ended up at least killing him the first time and then going, that's good.
Yeah, I'm at this point of the game where I'm supposed to kill Diamond second form, and so I'm level 130, something like this, and I know I can kill him, but I need to use quite a lot of consumables. You know how you can stack the demon periapts and these things?
Mm-hmm.
You can stack 4 of them, and if I stack these and I have enough of them, I can probably destroy Diamond. But it means I kind of need to farm some of these. And so the difficulty curve is a bit weird, because there's these moments where, well, you need to kind of farm to get over things. And so I think that if they do that again in Dragon's Dogma 2, they need to, soften the difficulty curve a bit more. Because difficulty is good, especially when you game with like Dragon's Dogma, where you have mechanics you can exploit. When you master the mechanics, you can definitely play well enough to have some difficulty. But I think, like, these walls that come back again and again are not the best way to keep players interested in the long run.
Yeah, for sure. I know for sure Bitter Black Isle was one that I noticed when I ran through it the first time, because I didn't really know what to expect, and you're constantly hitting these walls, you don't really know what to do. I will say the beginning game, because I remember when I first picked up the game, I quit it too. I picked it up right about when Elden Ring came out. I hadn't had anything to play at the time. So I'm like, I'm going to try this Dragon's Dogma. People told me to try it. I jumped in, played for about 2 hours, didn't really like it at all, quit. Then when I went back to play it, I really enjoyed it, obviously, because I spent more time with the game. But I would say one of the biggest things about the difficulty curve is that when you're playing it for the first time, it is hard to know kind of what you're supposed to be doing in combat. So a lot of times your pawns are a huge part of how you get past stuff. So there's this very early on, you can find this well that you go in, and there's Saurians down below that you fight. It's like one of the first quests you get in Casardis, and you'll go in there, and you're like, what, level 10 to 15, something like that, and you can't kill them. You do no damage whatsoever. This was very surprising to me, because I'm like, this is a very low-level quest. What the heck? And ends up, if you just have a pawn who has any sort of ice magic, all they have to do is freeze the Saurians or deal some damage from them, and then you can take them on pretty well. Or you attack their tail, and then they'll take some more damage. I think it has a huge learning curve because you're learning about every monster. Whereas sometimes in other games, once you kind of figure out the combat itself, a lot of the encounters are at least similar enough you can get past it. But each monster has its own kind of unique playstyle you need to go into. For example, golems and metal golems was a huge one because when you fight golems, if you're a magic character, you're not doing anything. You're basically standing back and protecting, or I mean, you could technically use your staff, I think, on mage. But like most of the time, when you're fighting a golem and you're a magic guy, you're doing nothing. Versus if you're playing Strider, you're in the battle. You're on his head. You're hitting him constantly. And then you switch to the metal golems, and it's the complete opposite. You know, like or no, not exactly the complete opposite, but like Strider has a little bit more of an advantage over even Warrior in that case, because Warrior can't do hardly anything if those totems are up in the air and all that stuff, because he can't hit nothing. So then you want range, but now your magic characters don't have range either, so now you want your bow character. I think playing into the pawns is the biggest part of the difficulty curve, because you really want them to be just taking care of something for you, especially in Bitter Black Isle. You have a lot of just massive amount of enemy variety. You have no idea what you're going to be fighting. Those flying enemies can come out of nowhere, and then you want your Strider to deal with them. And I mean, it's just a Bitter Black Isle for sure, because the enemy variety is a huge wall. But that early game, I noticed playing into your pawn's strength was probably one of the easier ways to get by. When I went from playing my first playthrough on easy to hard the second time, I had to really exploit a lot of that stuff.
Yeah, I think there's also something you quickly touched about is that so there's a lot of ways to play in Dragon's Dogma with the class variety that is pretty high, but there's also some classes where when you're playing, for example, a melee only character and all the enemies in front of you are flying and you're just kind of standing around. Like, to me, probably the worst one are liches, because they simply never go down and you're there just trying to hit them and you can't do anything. You're just there waiting. Like, and I think that's probably something they should try to touch on a bit. Because obviously when you're playing, for example, if you're playing Assassin or Strider, well, you can pretty much take on anything. Simply because you have a range and a melee option. You're both good at both of these, so nothing's really a serious problem you can't overcome. But for example, if you're playing a warrior and there's a flying enemy that never comes down, you're gone. And for golems, you pointed out pretty well. If you're playing a mage, you just can't do anything. And so
yeah, that was a big reason why I ended up liking Strider and Magic Archer more than most, because they have nothing holding them back. The only thing that is tough on Strider is that you don't have easy access to magic damage unless you have a couple daggers. So that's the only thing. And then once you get one of those daggers, it's a little easier. And then Magic Archer does everything because you can just have physical daggers. So I really ended up just falling in love with that one, because like when you're playing Sorcerer, you run into, again, golems where you can't even touch them at all. And then you run into just certain situations where like it's not super easy. Obviously, you have Holy Focus Bolt, which once you figure out how to use that, that is so nice for like everything. But golems specifically for if you're playing Sorcerer, like, all right, I'm gonna have my Strider do everything, and I'm just gonna sit here.
Yeah, there's this thing where, well, also it's something with Dragon's Dogma. So I've played with most classes, and I remember there's some points where I was completely stuck, and I just switched class. There's this point, right before Diamond. There's this village, this ruined village underground, which on Bitter Black Isle 2 can be a real pain in the ass, where you have generally two dragons that cast spells from miles away, and you have, depending on the situation, you're going to have some minotaurs everywhere or some living armors, which are both pretty strong. And so I remember once I got there playing Sorcerer. I just cast a tornado in the middle, which killed all the Minotaurs in one hit. and I was like, yeah. And just before that, I was struggling to get through with other classes. That was pure pain. So it's a bit funny. And the tornado, I've seen one of your shorts where you were talking about tornado. It's such a fun spell to use.
It is. It's just one of those things that they just put it in the game because it's cool. I mean, it's not in the game for any particular reason other than it's just cool. It's fun to cast a tornado and have everything sucked up into it. My favorite, man, I'll tell you what, my favorite is there's in the bottom left of the map, I think is where it's at. There's these two Cyclopses, and then there's a bunch of goblins. I love summoning that there because it not only sucks up and kills the Cyclopses, but it throws all the goblins way up into the air and throws them out, and it's just so much fun to do it over and over.
Yeah. I think it's just amazing because again, the comparison with Skyrim is there. Like Skyrim's magic is the most boring system ever. First of all, Skyrim's magic does not work above a certain level because there's no way. The only way to scale up Skyrim's magic damage is potions. If you don't have potions, you can't scale up Skyrim's magic, which means that at a certain level, you do no damage with Skyrim magic. And the worst with this is that, well, the spells are all the same. Basically, there's different levels of spells, and depending on the element you use, it's the same spell with a different color. Like, if you look at ice magic in Dragon's Dogma, it's going to be throwing giant stalagmites or stalactites. It's not just throwing ice through hands. If you throw fireballs, it's not throw fire through hands. It's fireballs, explosions, walls of fire. Like, if you throw lightning magic, you're going to summon a giant lightning whip. It's not going to be throw lightning through hands, which is something I really love. The fact that they went over the top to create spells that create real variety in the elements you use, and that's pretty amazing.
Yeah, each individual magic spell is very, very different in combat. I know the lightning whip in particular, if you give that to a pawn, it's very effective versus if you have it on your own self, it's actually not nearly as good because you can't move as much in combat with it, and so if you just throw it on a pawn, they'll shred, and they can deal with this stuff a little bit better than you can if you're like causing the enemy to focus on you. So then you just take all the attention as a fighter, and then just have your pawn go whip them. Oh, it's so good for Cyclopses for sure, since they're weak to lightning and stuff like that.
Yeah, I think before I want us now to move to maybe talking a bit more about Dragon's Dogma 2. First of all, what was your reaction when you realized Dragon's Dogma 2 was a real thing? Because this was more of a myth for quite some time.
Yeah, it was very surprising. So first off, I actually wasn't even... I mean, I didn't really know about Dragon's Dogma 2 until the beginning of this year. Hardly at all. And so I got lucky, and I really fell in love with the game, and then almost immediately, as soon as I fell in love with it, they announced the sequel. So it's really nice for me. I know a lot of people have been waiting years for this to happen.
10 years for some of them.
Yeah, years, just forever for this to happen. And I'm waiting, I don't know, a year, I guess. So it doesn't really feel... Honestly, less than a year is how long I'm going to have to wait for it. So it's pretty sweet. I remember... at least the last trailer, they talked about some of the new classes and stuff they were going to put in, and I don't know. It's just such a fun experience going through that game and fighting monsters and stuff, and it's going to be really nice to be able to fight new monsters, fight the same monsters a different way, fight some of these old classes. I think the most interesting thing will be to see the difference between 1 and 2 because they did Dragon's Dogma Online for a while, and that... From what I've seen of it, which isn't much, but they had very, very kind of focused classes. So you have in the first game, you have kind of Strider, which is all archery and all dagger abilities, essentially. You could use pretty much anything of either. Well, in the online version, I think it was a bit more focused, where you had your ranger classes, whereas actually just straight up archery focused. And then you had like twin blade classes that were straight up twin blade, no archery at all. So that'll be interesting to see how the two kind of what's going to be the major differences, because I think the class variation is going to be huge. And if you can make your pawns It'll be interesting to see if you can make your pawns more stuff this time too, because I know they locked the more focused ones like Magic Archer and
Yeah, all the
the
hybrid
dual
classes.
classes.
Really.
Yeah, they lock those to your character. So it'll be I would imagine they'll keep the hybrid ones locked to the main player as well this time, but I don't know. I mean, they have a lot of options they could do.
Yeah, because like it's funny, you had to wait something like a year to have news about Dragon's Dogma 2. For me, I literally picked the game up maybe a week before, a week or two before they announced the second one. So I'm like, yeah, good time to start playing this game. And
Yeah,
so,
for sure.
so that's funny to think that some people, have been waiting for at least 5, maybe way more, 10 years for a game and would just come here and we're newbies. Especially when you think about the fact that Dragon's Dogma, the original version, was very different from the one we played, because both of us played Dark Arisen, which is a version that is modified compared to the original. And for example,
Very modified too.
fast travel, with the crystals, which is an amazing system of fast travel in my opinion, was not a thing in the original one. And considering the amount of walking needed, I think I understand also why a lot of people kind of dropped it. Because we're both Outward players. We know what walking is.
Oh, yeah.
We do know what
aware.
walking is. And we're pretty much, we don't mind walking too much because we know what it is and we're able to enjoy it. But a lot of people probably didn't have the patience for it, especially when there's Skyrim, when you can fast travel whenever you want. There's no limitations on that.
Yeah, I would say for sure, at least when it came out, because I know they came out very similar times, Dragon's Dogma and Skyrim. I would say that is the biggest reason why Skyrim went way more than Dragon's Dogma is. Dragon's Dogma original. I mean, I made a short a while ago that was talking about. I said Dragon's Dogma has the best fast travel, and I kind of described it. And a lot of people's comments were like, "Yeah, it does now, but you should have seen it back in the day when you had no way to travel around and stuff." And I mean, yeah, I can imagine it's awful. I know even now, it's not nearly as good as I'd like it because really, when the fast travel system explodes, is in G+. Because that's when you get more crystals, so you can put more places. And then at that point, you can pretty much travel to any general location that you want. You could travel to the up part of the map, the bottom part. Not like specific areas every single time, but you can travel to the region that you need to go to in NG+. The first run is a little bit trickier because I would say one of the locations I wanted to put a port crystal next to was one of those healing pools. I thought that was a cool idea so I could get healing water whenever I wanted. But then if I did that, I was so far from any other objective that I would have to walk really far to, say, Blue Moon Tower or one of the catacombs area. So I ended up just not using the pools and just putting them next to the key locations where I needed to fight big monsters and stuff instead.
Yeah, on my first playthrough, I did not fast travel at all. So there was quite a lot of walking. I can say that.
Yeah, I can imagine.
There was quite a lot of walking, and even if I really love Dragon's Dogma's movement system, I think it really, really does not fit long distance running that much. Especially when you play a tall character in heavy armor. Moving around the map is not the funniest thing in the world.
No, for sure. Yeah, I think if they had I know there's a mod that you can do specifically to take away stamina when running out of combat. And I think that alone, it wouldn't have 100% fixed it, but it would have fixed at least close to 80% of the issues that people have. Because honestly, that stamina is brutal. You end up just shredding through your potions and stuff, just trying to get to places, because it does take quite a while to get there.
Yeah, especially when you consider that for most classes, whenever your character does not have any stamina, it literally stops moving.
Yeah.
That's
why I ended up liking Strider so much too, is because you could use the roll and it was basically the same speed as the run. So then you could just spam roll and have full stamina when you got to a fight.
That's a funny thing, because in some older Zelda games, you could do the same and roll to get faster around the map. But if you rolled too much, your character ended up confused and just fell on the ground.
Oh, really?
Because it rolled too much, and head spinning.
Huh. That's interesting.
Quick question: what features do you think can be improved a lot from Dragon's Dogma 1 to Dragon's Dogma 2?
Well, the number one feature definitely would be the stamina. I think they should look at that a little bit. The number two, I think a lot of people had issues with the UI. The UI system, the inventory system, it would be nice to, for sure, I know a lot of people didn't like the UI system. It was very hard to kind of organize your gear, crafting materials specifically to kind of upgrade items. So say if you wanted like a trowel for upgrading a random bow, you'd have to go and search through all your stuff to find the trowel, or maybe this random rare material, especially the ores. The ores got really annoying because they all kind of look the same, but they have different names. And so you have to look through all of them and then maybe find the right one you have, and then you don't have it, so you gotta go look for it and out in the world. That is kind of a pain. I understand that. I didn't, again, hate it because I didn't craft that much. Most of the stuff I needed, I went and bought, or just ended up having it, and I duplicate it. So that's kind of cool. I hope they bring back the black cat. That was awesome. I love the duplicating system.
Oh yeah, that was sure a lot of fun. Some diversity in the way you could complete quests. For example, yeah, with the way you could duplicate items and make fake ones. The way it influences quests was something really funny to me, where the game took into account the fact that you could make fake ones. And for example, with the ring that increases the speed at which you cast spells, and you can just make a fake one. And then when the tries to open the chest that gives you a reward, it just doesn't work. And he's like, uh-oh, I think the ring is broken. No, it's just a fake one. I know with this guy, that was the funniest thing. With this guy that asks you to find a book, to cast a spell. And you can just make a fake one, and then if you give him the real one, he comes to help you with the fight with the griffin, and he's like superhero mode. He casts a giant wall of fire, and then if you give him a fake book, he just comes here and it fails miserably, and then he hates you.
I never seen that one before. That sounds cool.
He comes here and he's like, "Yeah, I'm gonna save you," and then it just does not work, and he's like standing around. And then when you try to speak to him in the town, he goes like, "Never trust an Artisan."
That's awesome.
There was all these funny interactions.
I think my biggest, if you were talking about the mechanics as well, I think my biggest thing, this is something I brought up before, is I hope they do a little bit of rework on the armor, because some of the coolest armor sets and items you could get in the game were items like the gloves. I think the gloves of might or something like that. They were purplish and they let you climb faster as long as you equipped them. I'd love more variety in unique items like that. Like you and me, we're Outward players. We're used to unique items in terms of armor that have a ton of stats. A lot of games don't do that. They just put, this is armor, it protects you, it has defensive stats, stuff like that. And while I understand it being a different game, I really think armor having certain passive stats adds a lot to the game, because it not only means you can make your character look different ways for fashion, but you can also build around them a little bit better. I know some of the tier 3 armor in Bitter Black Isle actually had plus 26 strength tied to it or something. And so there was really, by the end game, no reason to run anything but the armor pieces that gave you more damage or more stagger and stuff like that. So I think if they increase the variety of unique armors that have stats on them, that'll be huge for the game, especially adding like plus healing or plus, plus support for your pawns, all kinds of cool stuff they could do with it.
Yeah. There's one thing I quickly want to talk about, a feature I kind of struggle with. It's climbing, because there's something with the climbing that maybe you've encountered, is that, the way, if you play on PC and with keyboard and mouse, the way the camera interacts with your keys to move around when climbing can be infuriating at times. And so, when you're trying to get on the head of the Cyclops, and suddenly the camera moves around, and then your keys are all inverted, and your character starts doing ape shit on the creature.
Yeah.
I think that's definitely...
Yeah, I've had a lot of trouble on some of the dragons with that, especially when you try to climb their heart. You climb
Yeah.
all the way up your tail. You're all the way under their underbelly. You're almost there, and then all of a sudden your character grabs their leg and starts going a different direction.
Or
Like,
just
what are you doing?
or just turns around randomly.
Yeah, it goes upside down, starts going back down. It's like, bro, we just got up here.
Yeah, that's something I think they definitely should try and improve. And obviously, yeah, the writing. I think in Dragon's Dogma 2, so we've seen a few things in the trailers that indicate that the story might be way more interesting than it was in Dragon's Dogma 1. It wasn't bad, it was just a bit bland. Like there was nothing really exceptional about the way
Mm-hmm.
Dragon's Dogma 1's story was developing itself. And especially, I think they need to do quite a lot of improvement on the side quests, because in Dragon's Dogma 1 there wasn't that many side quests, and like most of the quests you end up doing at the board quests was just fetch quests and
Escorts and stuff
yeah,
like
escorts.
that. Yeah.
And with the escorts, when you try to do them legit on your first playthrough, it's boring as hell. But if you do them
Yeah.
if you do them in the new game plus, you just teleport around and then it's done. You do it in the blink of an eye, and then it's just
Yeah.
that's it.
Yeah, I would agree. I think the main quest had a lot of really cool moments. The story itself, at least the plot, is actually pretty cool. You know, the ending and everything around it. But like some of the events of the main story they're not that intriguing, and definitely the side quests are very bland. I know there's this moment where you go into the catacombs and you fight this mage dude, and like the entire thing is boring other than fighting the mage dude. Like the rest of it is just, why am I here? You know, it doesn't matter that much. And then you have moments like where you're fighting the griffin, and it's a super awesome kind of main quest you have to do.
Yeah.
So yeah, I totally agree. There's a pretty big difference in a huge, just this one's great, this one sucks, you know? Did you ever do Valmiro's quest?
Which
You know who
one?
Valmiro is?
Maybe not. It's not a name I'm familiar.
This is the
with.
guy in your starting town. I think he's like your cousin or something. And this is just a side quest. You don't have to do it at all. But the whole point is that the dude gets lost constantly.
Oh
And
no,
so
I've never
he's going
done this
out to
one.
look for plants. He looks for different plants. And every time he goes to look for a different plant, he gets lost. You got to bring him back home. And you got to do it again. You got to do it like 5 times. My first playthrough, he ended up as my lover because I ended up doing all of his quests to go save him and bring him back. He's like this lame dude.
No,
Like
I've
that
never
side
done
quest
this
was
one.
funny because he's so lame, but the actual quest kind of sucked.
No, on my first playthrough, I kind of skipped on the first area a bit, so I did not do most of the quest. Even when you're supposed to go get Kina, who's lost in the forest. For a
Yeah.
long part, since I skipped that, I was convinced she was fucking dead. Well, she wasn't, but I was convinced she died. And so there's a lot of things since the quest, expire if you don't do them fast enough and if you skip. But there's about the main quest, it's mostly that some parts feel a bit rushed. Because, for example, your relationship with Gregory the dragon is not explored at all. Like, he's the purpose of the main quest, but you meet him twice in the entire game. Like, you see him, if you think
Time you
about
meet
it,
him is pretty much the end, almost.
you see him at the start, and then you see him at the end, but you never really interacted with him at all. And so the effects of destruction that's supposed to be kind of brought by the dragon, you don't see them at all. And so it feels a bit empty, and there's all these subplots, and where you chose to save Fornival or not, you chose to do all these things, but they don't seem to have that much of an impact on the rest. Like, for example, I was expecting that if you maybe saved a lot of people, maybe they would choose you instead of the Duke after you killed Gregory. But they don't. It does not change. It's always the same thing, and that's Outward had the same problem in many ways because the quests were always the same. You have the illusion of making choices, but the ending is always the same. And that's kind of the same thing with Dragon's Dogma, is that they give you choices that in the end does not have that much of an effect. And that's kind of a shame.
I would say one of the biggest ones, your topic with those quests that I can think of right now is actually Fornival specifically, because your first playthrough, he's a bad guy. he's like this black market dealer who's putting these people out of their homes, and so I was like, I'm gonna save these people. I'm gonna make him go to jail so they can have their home, right? Well, what's the ending?
Oh
He goes
yeah,
to jail, you lose access to your Perriettes, and then they just kind of have a home. Or you can do it the other way and have really powerful Perriettes, and then nothing happens. You just put these people out of their home. There's no real consequence for it.
it's even worse than that. If you expel them out of their homes, they leave the lower quarters and they survive when the city crumbles. But if you buy the home for them and save them from expulsion, they fucking die.
Really? I didn't know
Yeah,
that.
if you
No
if you
way.
so if you expel them from their home, you convince them to leave to help Fornival. Then they will leave the lower quarters, and then the city crumbles, and this big pit appears. The big pit appears.
Yeah.
They moved out, and so you can talk to them, and they say, "Thank you, you saved us." So it's
So
even
doing
worse.
the bad thing is the good thing in that
Yeah,
situation.
it's
That's
even
crazy.
worse than that. So they're not very important NPCs, and one of them is kind of a conspirationist who says
Yeah.
the Risen is useless and the dragon is not going to kill anyone. So it's like a very it doesn't matter anyway. Whatever you do, it's kind of bad. The best choice is always going to be to help Fornival because you get the Perriettes, as you said, and so. I don't know. It's a bit.
And you get a
weird.
discount on those Perriettes after
Yeah,
that,
and
too.
you do. So it's a bit of a weird thing because you are presented with a lot of choice and you have the impression they matter, but they don't matter that much. Maybe some of them do. Like for example, if you do the quest of the entire romance quest with the Duke's wife, you can actually get her killed in this. So there are some choices that do matter, but it's never. And for example, my biggest disappointment was the ending choice, where you can choose to go fight Gregory or run away. And so if you run away and sacrifice your lover, well, you just have a cutscene and then you're considered dead, and it brings you back in front of the same choice.
Yeah.
You don't have a
I
different.
remember that.
So I was a bit disappointed. I was expecting, a real different ending. No, it's just a cutscene, and then you get back to it and you go fight the dragon. And it's something. I know making multiple choices games is not very easy because it demands a lot of work. But I think it's now or never to really change this and try for Dragon's Dogma 2 to have your choices have way more influence, which seems to be something they are advertising. Because I don't know if you really watched closely, but they really kind of advertise the fact that you have to choose between two factions, the humans and the cat people.
No, I had not seen that. Well, I hadn't seen that specific part that you were kind of
Yeah, so
supposed to choose between. That's kind of interesting.
well, it's not something they kind of said directly, but there's basically, from what I've seen, there are two factions that are kind of fighting for power and control. And one of them is a human-based faction, and the other one is literally Khajiits from Skyrim, but they don't say that because, Bethesda, blah, blah, blah. Lawsuits. But but what's one other interesting thing is that in the first Dragon's Dogma you can choose to have a character that is short, but it's not really a dwarf, it's just a short human. You can choose to have elf ears, but it's not really elves. But in Dragon's Dogma 2 it seems that it's really the case where there's going to be elves. There's this whole system with learning languages in Dragon's Dogma 2. It's pretty interesting. Where, for example, if you go meet elves, you don't speak Elvish, so you can't communicate with them. But if you have a pawn that has learned Elvish, he can translate, and then you can understand the elves.
Yeah, that sounds pretty awesome, actually.
So I think that really have
cool.
improved on the utility of pawns on many ways, even in exploration. And
Well, I know they added that. I don't remember if this is the correct name for it, but I think it was a class called something like the Trickster or something. And the entire point of that class alone is to buff your pawns. It's to distract enemies with random projections and then buff your pawns so that they do more damage and they can actually be the focus of the battle. which I think that's a great idea. That's really cool.
Yeah, because I think like you could play a support in Dragon's Dogma 1 by playing the mage, but from what I've heard, it's probably the most boring way to play Dragon's Dogma,
Yeah.
especially
I know
considering.
that there's a way to actually cheese the game a little bit with rangers. If you get 3 ranger pawns and you upgraded your pawn with max stamina for ranger, they'll solo the game for you. Well, not solo, it's 3 of them, but they'll do the whole thing for you because ranger is so powerful with like Great Gamble and stuff that they can just wreck monsters with one shot. It's very interesting to watch. There's like some very small clips out there of people doing, I think, Damon with 3 ranger pawns and stuff like that. It's crazy.
Yeah, I think like I really, since Dragon's Dogma, when you think about, you can solo the game probably with some classes. Assassin most likely is made for that.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the pawns are really at the center of the gameplay. This idea of Dragon's Dogma, when you think about it, is the perfect game when you have no friends, because you can have the pawns, be friends for you when you don't have any.
Yeah.
And so I really want to see, it's clearly a game where the AI is going to be at the center of the gameplay. And so I really want to see what they are going to do with the AI, because they better not fuck this up, because else the game is going to be a nightmare.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think the AI is going to be. I know they've said many times that they want that to be a bigger focus, to be a little bit better. Because, I mean, that's really the determining factor in the first game, Dragon's Dogma, is just because, at least in the early game, your biggest advantage is buffs. You want your magic pawn to be buffing your weapon constantly so that you can do the correct type of damage to the correct enemy. So you want lightning for Cyclopses and Ogres. You want fire for Goblins. You want ice for Saurians. And if you give your mage pawn, too many of the different elements, sometimes they'll just pick the wrong element because they have them, and it's like, no, this is. I know once you get further in the game and they learn more about monsters, they do a little bit better of a job. But I think at one point I just said screw it and went holy damage only, because holy damage is always good, at least somewhat, and she would always pick the wrong element. So I just ended up with at least a better option there.
Yeah, I remember a very clear example of that when I was fighting, the fire dogs. And so
yeah,
I had given my healer pawn, fire imbue. And so I had an ice weapon, so I actually was doing great. And then suddenly, the healing pawn cast the fire imbue, and then I do no damage just because.
Yeah, yeah, that's the worst. That's the worst part of it.
And
yeah, for sure.
Yeah, that was actually quite funny. And there's a lot of things you can do with pawns. It's very interesting.
Yeah, I hope they do at least a little tweaking to where we can customize pawn actions a little bit, specifically in combat, so we can get them to use certain skills more than others. Because I think that would be really cool, is if you could set up a pawn to, every time you engage in combat, they're going to back up 15 yards, and they're going to charge up a massive arrow and snipe the enemy. And so the whole time you can kind of block and keep the enemy's attention. All of a sudden, boom, just get nailed and they die. I think stuff like that would be super cool, or where you could maybe, again, use you could have all of your mage pawns stand back and actually cast in a good distance versus being 2 feet from the enemy, like we talked about earlier. Just could get them to control and do a little bit better in battle from your own actions you want to give them.
Yeah, because you can already technically in Dragon's Dogma 1 customize the way they act, with the inclinations, with Medicant and all these things. But first of all, it's a pretty obscure system, because it's based on some consumables you can get in the first camp only. Kinda. So it's a bit weird, and I think a lot of people probably completely skipped that. And
it's not very specific either. Like, those things are, your pawn is going to be less aggressive in combat. Well, what does that really mean? Does that mean they're going to stay back and cast spells? Does that mean they're going to attack less? And it's not as specific enough. So
and the way you customize your pawn by talking to it, and then you can literally customize your pawn to diss you every time.
Yeah, it is kind of funny.
This is very funny. So before we end this, I want to talk about one last thing, which I think is kind of a heated debate. What do you think about adding co-op to Dragon's Dogma 2?
I think it would have been awesome.
Mm.
I think it would have been awesome. I am a big co-op guy. I love co-op. I play co-op games almost exclusively. Dragon's Dogma is the only game on my channel that doesn't have co-op. I love co-op, and it's a lot of fun. Now, Dragon's Dogma specifically, I think, benefits from not having co-op because of the pawn system. And so I actually talked about my brother with this for a while because he was like, "Oh, it sucks. It's not going to have co-op." Well, it does and doesn't have co-op. So it doesn't in the fact that you can't jump in with your buddy and play in the same game. That would be awesome. It kind of sucks. I always wanted that for Skyrim too. I thought it'd be fun. But what you can do, at least in the first game, hopefully they bring this back, is you can play alongside your friend's pawn.
Yeah.
So you can have, say, a group of 3 of you can have all of the same characters. You can play with both of your buddies' pawns and your own pawn and your own character, and you have a full team. And then they can do the same. And so you can kind of play with your buddies together, but separately. So you're like upgrading your pawns to help them out and stuff like that. I think that's a very cool idea. It's not the standard co-op system, so you're not going to get people super pumped about it. But at least it has that potential where you and a buddy could theoretically play the entire game together without ever playing together.
Yeah.
Because you're upgrading your pawns together, which is a really neat idea. But I do understand people wanted traditional co-op, and like I said, I kind of wanted it too because co-op is so much fun if you have people you can regularly play with. It's a really fun experience, especially in a game like this where you can jump on monsters and stuff.
And where you can grab people.
Yeah, you can grab people and do all kinds of cool interactions. But I do see why they didn't, because sometimes it's like a game that came out this year, Lies of P. Lies of P was probably one of the very few games that didn't have co-op that came out as a Souls-like. And it strived because it was a solo game, and they were able to better design it around being a solo game.
Because that's the thing.
I see a little bit of both.
Because that's the thing. For example, to me, one of the best examples of big quotes failed co-op to me is the way Elden Ring's co-op was made. Because Elden Ring's co-op was directly implemented. It's a carbon copy of Dark Souls 3's co-op system. And Dark Souls 3's co-op system works very well in a game that is mostly, corridors and a very
linear,
closed areas and with bosses that close the areas. And the fact that you would leave the host's game whenever you killed a boss was perfect for games like Dark Souls 3. But to me, it really, really fails in Elden Ring since it's an open world. It does not make much sense. And
yeah, it just doesn't work very well.
The thing that comforted me in this idea the most was I played the mod for Elden Ring that removes all the limitations of co-op. And so you play a real co-op system with... You're not a phantom, you're another player, you can use torrent, you have the same amount of health and potions, you have no limitations, and it feels like the game works better this way when with the original co-op of Elden Ring. And
I agree. I played that as well, and I can attest to that. It is that co-op system specifically was awful. I mean, me and my brother tried the first week after we played for a little bit. We were like, let's do a full co-op run, and we got pretty far, but at a certain point, you get too many invasions, and you can't get through the area enough, and then you end up just going, whatever, I just do it solo, and it loses that. And then you play seamless co-op, and you just get to fight. Yeah, it's easier. That's the thing, it is easier in co-op, obviously, because you're distracting enemy AI. You can cast spells a little bit easier, so you can just one-shot bosses while your buddy distracts, stuff like that. But that's kind of the point of it is, co-op is a little bit different. So I enjoyed the co-op seamless mod a lot. I think that was the biggest flaw of that system. It just doesn't work in an open world for sure.
Because that's one thing I'm a bit scared of, because so Dragon's Dogma really has a system that is based around the fact that you have pawns and you don't need co-op partners. And it's something I'm always a bit scared when you have a game that feels like it could be the best co-op system ever, but at the same time kind of revolves around the fact that it's not co-op, that it fakes being co-op because it's with an AI. I'm a bit scared of the way it could be implemented, because it would necessarily have limitations, because having your friend as a pawn would be very strong. And so I'm a bit worried about that. I think they will not implement it, simply because it's the game philosophy of the first one, and they're probably going to keep it that way. And at the same time, I think like it's kind of a shame. So I'm a bit in a gray area, because I'm like you in a way. I want it in a way, and at the same time, really understand why they wouldn't put it in.
Exactly. Yeah. There's just too many examples, especially at this point in the gaming history, of games that had a lot of potential, but because they added co-op, they had too many issues. Or the other way around is they wanted it to be a really good game story-wise and linear-wise, and because they didn't make it co-op, it just wasn't fun because there was no really interesting interaction. So there's a little bit of both, and there's a lot of reasons to not have co-op in the sequel, and I think that's why they don't want to do it. But I will say it would have been awesome. It would be really cool to fight a giant dragon with your buddy, but pawns will do, I guess.
Well, thank you for. Before we end up, is there anything you want to talk about before we end this?
I don't think anything specific. I will say I loved Dragon's Dogma to death, and I think the biggest thing they could do, I know this is pretty obvious, we all kind of agree on this, is multiple save files, so that I can play the game multiple times without going and restarting. That's one of my biggest complaints, is I restarted the game and now I can't make any videos on cool skills and stuff until I redo the whole game and get all my stuff back.
Yeah, I see.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, that's true. That's something I completely forgot to talk about, and thank you for ending it on this. Well,
Yeah, for sure.
thank you everyone for watching, and I hope you found this interesting. Thank you, Sheen, for accepting this interview.
Absolutely.
And I hope we'll be able to enjoy Dragon's Dogma 2 to the best of its potential. People have waited a long time for this, and so I think it's time that I think it's the best time for Capcom to really make Dragon's Dogma what it was meant to be from the start, and probably a way bigger RPG than it is in people's mind right now. Thank you very much for watching. I'll see you again, and bye.